Namaskar, welcome to Democracies of the World, our show on Sansad TV, where we take you through the latest happenings from parliaments across the globe. In today's edition, we'll talk about the political crisis in United Kingdom and big developments happening in Sri Lanka, where not just the economy but democratic values have also been collapsing for some time. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll also take you through the parliamentary structure of Papua New Guinea. I'm your host, Bhawna Nayar. Let's start the program with political and economic meltdown in Sri Lanka. The island nation is in an indefinite nationwide state of emergency as anger and protests grow over President's ongoing silence. Protesters have been taking over the presidential palace, the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister's home and the state broadcasters, taking it off the air. At least 84 people have been hospitalized following a standoff between the police and protesters. The protesters have vowed to stay until the resignations are official. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Singh has informed country speaker to nominate a Prime Minister who is acceptable to both the government and the opposition. More details in this report.
Amid massive economic turmoil, political vacuum continues in the island nation with an exiting president and no clarity on who will take charge of a country in an economic mess. On Wednesday morning, Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa left the country days after protesters stormed his home. Following his departure, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the Prime Minister's office in Colombo, chanting and demanding that neither the President nor the Prime Minister be spared. Security forces were seen using tear gas shells and water cannons to disperse the crowd. Reports claim that his younger brother and former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa has also left the country. The protests reached a fever pitch on Saturday when thousands of protesters seized the President's home, office and the official residence of the Prime Minister following months of demonstrations that have all but dismantled the Rajapaksa family's political dynasty which ruled Sri Lanka for most of the past 2 decades. The premises virtually became a new picnic spot, with people strolling through the balconies, relaxing in bedrooms, working out at the gym, and taking a dip in the swimming pool. They also set on fire his private residence in the capital. Meanwhile, lawmakers agreed to elect a new president next week, but struggled on Tuesday to decide the makeup of a new government to lift the bankrupt country out of economic and political collapse. The new president will serve the remainder of Rajapaksa's term, which ends in 2024, and could potentially appoint a new prime minister who would then have to be approved by parliament. The island nation of 22 million people has suffered months of lengthy blackouts, acute food and fuel shortages, and galloping inflation in its most painful downturn on record. Protesters for months have demanded the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, whose government has been blamed for chronic mismanagement of the country's finances. Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned as Prime Minister in May after mass protests that began in March turned violent. Rajapaksa appointed Singh as Prime Minister in May in an effort to solve the shortages and start economic recovery. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Meanwhile, United Kingdom is facing a rocky period for economic and political difficulties as the race to replace Prime Minister Boris Johnson gets underway. Former Finance Minister Rishi Sunak led the field of Conservative MPs bidding to become Britain's next Prime Minister in the first ballot of Tory lawmakers on Wednesday as the race narrowed to 6 with the elimination of 2 candidates. Johnson resigned as the leader of the Conservative Party last week after his ministers resigned, paving way for the election of a new Prime Minister for the UK.
The race to replace Boris Johnson as the Conservative Party leader and British Prime Minister has officially begun. Former British Finance Minister Rishi Sunak won the most votes in the first round of voting to succeed Boris Johnson as 2 candidates were eliminated. He received 88 votes in the first round of UK leadership election. Sunak was followed by Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt, who's scoring highly in polls of Conservative members with 67 votes, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss with 50. Lawmaker Tom Tugendhat ex-Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and Attorney General Suella Braverman also remain on the ballot. With 2 candidates knocked out, 6 lawmakers are left in the race to lead the Conservative Party and the country. Former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt and Treasury Chief Nadeem Zahawi failed to reach the threshold of 30 votes by Conservative lawmakers needed to stay in the contest. The leadership contest was triggered last week when 58-year-old Johnson was forced to step down after a frenzy of more than 50 resignations from his government. Anger and discontent against Johnson, which remained bottled up through a number of scandals including Partygate, erupted after the way he dealt with sexual misconduct allegations against ex-Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher. It has been suggested Johnson knew about the allegations but still chose to promote Pincher to a senior position. Chris Pincher resigned last week. Johnson only narrowly survived a no-confidence vote among Conservative MPs last month. In December 2019, Boris Johnson won a landslide 80-seat victory on a promise to take Britain out of the European Union. But for many, the populist, convention-defying leader had outstayed his welcome.
And news now from Japan, where assassination of former Prime Minister has not only shocked the nation but also the world. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was gunned down during a speech for a legislative candidate he was supporting. Abe was Japan's Prime Minister 2 separate times, with his second stint lasting from 2012 until 2020 when he resigned. It was the first assassination of a sitting or former Japanese premier since the days of pre-war militarism in the 1930s. Here's the report.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was giving a campaign speech outside a train station on Friday when 2 gunshots rang out. Abe collapsed on the street. He was immediately airlifted to a hospital for emergency treatment but was not breathing and his heart had stopped. He was later pronounced dead after receiving massive blood transfusions. His autopsy revealed that the bullet that entered Abe's upper left arm damaged arteries beneath both collarbones, causing fatal massive bleeding. The attacker, 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, was arrested on the spot. He's a former member of the Japanese Navy. He told the police that he killed Abe because he believed that Abe was connected to a religious organization that he resented. The shooting came 2 days before the elections for Japan's upper house, the less powerful chamber of its parliament. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and his cabinet ministers cut short their campaign events to return to Tokyo. Abe was Japan's longest-serving leader before he stepped down for health reasons in 2020. Abe was a political blue blood who was groomed to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, former Prime Minister Nobusuke Kishi. He became Japan's youngest Prime Minister in 2006 at the age of 52. The end of Abe's first stint as Prime Minister was the beginning of 6 years of instability. When he returned to office in 2012, Abe pledged to revitalize the nation and get its economy out of its deflationary doldrums with Abenomics formula, which combined fiscal stimulus, monetary easing, and structural reforms. He won 6 national elections and bolstered Japan's defense role and capability and its security alliance with the United States. He also stepped up patriotic education at schools and raised Japan's international profile. The attack shocked Japan, one of the world's safest nations with the strictest gun control laws. The shooting has also sent shockwaves across the world. India observed a day of national mourning. In his tribute, Prime Minister Modi called Shinzo Abe an outstanding leader of Japan, a towering global statesman, and a great champion of India-Japan friendship. US President Joe Biden had a telephonic conversation with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to pay his condolences. In a message, Chinese President Xi Jinping credited Abe with making efforts to improve China-Japan relations. Other global leaders and organizations have also paid homage to the slain leader. Time magazine has also unveiled the cover of its forthcoming issue, featuring ex-Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe as a mark of tribute. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
Meanwhile, Japanese voted this week in the shadow of the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that brought heightened security as party leaders avoided mingling with crowds and delivered messages of upholding democracy and free speech during campaigning the day before.
Japan's governing party and its coalition partner have scored a sweeping victory in an upper house election held in the wake of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's assassination. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's Liberal Democratic Party won 63 seats, or more than half of the 125 seats. LDP's coalition partner Kobyuto won 13 seats. Both parties secured a total of 76 seats, comfortably retaining a majority in the 248-member upper chamber of parliament. Japan's upper house elections are held every 3 years to re-elect half the seats. This time, 125 seats were up for grabs, with 75 elected from constituencies and the remaining 50 through a proportional representation system. The ruling coalition's election success suggests that the public is backing Kishida's policies even as households struggle with rising prices of food and energy amid the Ukraine war and a sinking yen. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida led a minute's silence for Abe at the headquarters of the governing Liberal Democratic Party before announcing winning candidates. Even after stepping down as Prime Minister in 2020, Abe was highly influential in the LDP and headed its largest faction. According to experts, Abe's absence could change the power balance in the governing party that has almost uninterruptedly ruled post-war Japan since its 1955 foundation.
Moving on, voters in Papua New Guinea, a country in Oceania, voted in their first national elections in 5 years on July 4, 2022. General elections in the country only come around every 5 years and are embraced with great passion by voters hoping for change. A struggling economy, the impact of the pandemic, and growing frustrations after failing public services are among the leading issues. This year, the polls will take place for 2 weeks. Here are the details in this report.
Amid the struggling economy and growing pandemic-related issues, voting for Papua New Guinea's general elections started on July 4, 2022, to decide the coalition government that will rule one of the South Pacific's most populous and diverse nations for the next 5 years. The leading contenders to lead the new government are current Prime Minister James Marape and his predecessor who resigned in 2019, Peter O'Neill. Polling takes weeks and the composition of the government among more than 50 parties contesting 118 seats will not be known until Parliament next sits in August. About 2,351 candidates are running in the general polls, out of which 118 members will be elected to form a new government. Those parliamentarians will be representing each of the Papua New Guinea's electorates. Notably, Papua New Guinea has a multi-party system and so far, no party garnered unanimous public support to form a government on its own. The island country has currently 111 sitting MPs. Elections in Papua New Guinea are held every 5 years, and since its independence from Australia in 1975, elections in the nation of 9 million have been marred by violence, fraud and bribery. The elections are not only notable for Papua New Guinea's domestic environment, but also for the escalating intricacies in the geopolitical situation, given the war in Eastern Europe, the fog of which has reached far beyond the immediate borders.
Papua New Guinea is a constitutional monarchy. It is located north of Australia and east of Indonesia. Its parliament was first created in 1964 as the House of Assembly of Papua New Guinea and became the national parliament of Papua New Guinea in 1975 when independence was granted. The head of state is Queen Elizabeth II, represented in Papua New Guinea by a Governor General. Let's take a look. How does its parliament work?
Papua New Guinea is a beautiful country in Oceania, located north of Australia and east of Indonesia. The country is full of luscious jungles, indigenous tribes, and uncharted natural wonder. It is the world's third largest island country. At the national level, even after being ruled by three external powers since 1884, the country's constitution was adopted in 1975 and has been amended frequently since then. It became an independent Commonwealth realm in 1975 with Elizabeth II as its queen. It also became a member of the Commonwealth of Nations in its own right. Papua New Guinea has three levels of government: national, provincial, and local. Executive power is exercised by the government. Legislative power is vested in both the government and the parliament. The British monarch, represented by a Governor General, is head of state, and the Prime Minister is head of government. The Governor General is elected directly by members of the National Parliament and performs mainly ceremonial functions. The unicameral National Parliament has 111 members who are elected by citizens to serve 5-year terms. Of those, 89 represent single-member open electorates. Each of the other 22 represent one of the provincial electorates. Each province has its own provincial assembly and administration. Parliament also elects the Prime Minister, who in turn appoints the ministers of the National Executive Council or the Cabinet. The Prime Minister can be dismissed by the Governor General on the proposal of Parliament. Since independence, all governments have been formed by a coalition of parties because no party has won enough seats to form the government alone. Historically, there's been a high turnover of parliamentarians at general elections. The PNG Constitution protects new governments from parliamentary motions of no confidence during the first 18 months of a 5-year term. Papua New Guinea's judiciary is independent of the government. It protects constitutional rights and interprets the laws. The Supreme Court, National Court, and local and village courts form an independent justice system. The Governor General appoints the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
It would be interesting for you to know Papua New Guinea, known for its abundant resources, uncharted natural wonder and warm people, is one of the most diverse countries in the world and yet remains one of the world's least visited nations. So before we head into a short break, here are some fascinating facts you probably don't know about Papua New Guinea. Take a look. Welcome back. You're watching our special edition Democracies of the World. Moving on, amid the country's increasing inflation and economic volatility, Argentine left and right wings gathered in the Plaza de Mayo in a protest against the International Monetary Fund and in opposition to the national government. Thousands of people demonstrated in the streets of Buenos Aires on July 9 amid Independence Day celebrations to protest the government's action in the face of the country's socio-economic difficulties. Concerns are surfacing in the country about the negotiation of a debt of $45 billion with the IMF and unleashed inflation that accumulates 30% so far this year that, according to analysts, could reach 70%, in addition to shortages and rising dollar prices in the official and black markets. Moving on, the Congolese voted on July 10 in the first round of the Central African country's legislative and local elections, which should allow the party in power to keep its hold on both houses of parliament. About 2.8 million people in Congo voted to elect their deputies to the National Assembly and their municipal and departmental councillors. President Denis Sassou ruling Congolese Labour Party, which has 101 elected officials out of a total of 151 in the outgoing assembly, has fielded 127 candidates and expects to maintain its hold. The only opposition party with a parliamentary group in the lower house of parliament is the Pan-African Union for Social Democracy. The local councillors who will emerge from these elections are the electors who in turn will elect the 72 senators in the first chamber of parliament. The date of the second legislative elections, which aim to renew the National Assembly, has not been set. The former president of Angola, José Eduardo dos Santos, has died at the age of 79 following a long illness. Dos Santos, who served as president between 1979 and 2017, died in the Spanish city of Barcelona last week. Angola's president, João Lourenço, on Monday opened the signing of a condolence book for former president Dos Santos. Members of parliament, religious leaders, among others, participated in the commemoration event for the former president. Dos Santos' time in office was one of the longest-running presidencies in the world. He had ruled Angola for almost 40 years. Former Mexican President Luis Echeverría, blamed some of the country's worst political killings, has died at the age of 100. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador confirmed the death on Twitter. Echeverría was hospitalized for pulmonary problems in 2018. In 2004, he became the first former Mexican head of state formally accused of criminal wrongdoing. Prosecutors linked Echeverría to the country's so-called dirty war, in which hundreds of leftist activists and members of French guerrilla groups were imprisoned, killed, or simply disappeared. Echeverría governed Mexico from 1970 to 1976. And the Austrian capital Vienna has again topped the list of most livable cities in an annual index published by the British weekly The Economist. Its notoriously good infrastructure, especially its affordable public transport links, made the European capital stand out. The city has previously held the title in 2018 and 2019. Take a look. That's all we have in this edition of our program, Democracies of the World. Connect with us on various social media platforms for all the latest from India and around the world. You can send in your feedback at Sansad TV at sansad.nic.in. Stay tuned for more informative programs on Sansad TV. Till then, goodbye, namaskar.